Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, ndugu Paul.
How are you today?
I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Africa, Mother Africa.
Speaking of Mother Africa, there is some sad news coming out of the continent. Late last week, Shaka, one of Africa's legends, a former president of Tanzania, Benjamin William Mkapa, died. He was Tanzania's third president. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Well, first of all, before I go really any further, may his soul rest in eternal peace. Benjamin Mkapa, His Excellency, the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, for 2 terms from 1995.
To 2005.
2005, he was a man that served Tanzania at a time when, at least legally, it had accepted, I think, to move away from the one-party state. And he was a man that was remarkably smart, remarkably intelligent, remarkably articulate, and incredibly and uniquely experienced, whichever way you looked at him. Mind you, he was one of those few people from our region who earlier had been very lucky and blessed to have a uniquely sophisticated quality education. He went to college when there was only one college to boot in the entire East and Central Africa where you could get a university degree. And that college, Makerere College, as it were, was a constituent college of what was known as the University of London. So you actually got a University of London degree, but your certificate indicated that it was awarded at Makerere.
Interesting.
Very few people, ndugu Paul, could get a chance to get on that campus and breathe the air on that beautiful campus that many, many years later was, of course, a place that you legitimately called home.
Yeah,
For a couple of years.
him and I share something in common. Remarkable in a sense that Makerere University has remained one of those premier institutions in Africa. And the likes of the later President Benjamin Mkapa, these are the kinds of people that institution has nurtured over the years. You look in Kenya, it also, we had the President Mwai Kibaki, who went to school there. You look at Benjamin Mkapa and so many other leaders across the continent came from that institution.
Not forgetting, of course, Benjamin Mkapa's mentor and the former high school teacher and Tanzania's founding president, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere.
That's correct.
You know, it was very interesting that when he got his degree in 1962,
at the time of Uganda's independence. Wow.
At the time of Uganda's independence, and Tanganyika, his country, had gotten independence a year earlier. He was in the same class with someone else that I am sure you know, who happens to be the Ugandan president's senior media advisor, Mr. John Nagenda. They were basically English majors.
Yep.
At Makerere College.
Both of them very prolific in so many ways. Their writings are classics.
Their command of the English language, they spoke the English language as if they were ballerinas. I particularly got to know Mr. Benjamin Mkapa when I became an international broadcaster here at the Voice of America in the 1990s. And I had an opportunity to interview President Mkapa a couple of times. I recall the first time, as a matter of fact, I interviewed him was here in Washington, D.C. I was introduced to him by a colleague who at the time headed the Voice of America Swahili service. That was Ndugu Emmanuel Muganda. We actually interviewed him around the Smithsonian Institute. And I recall we had an excellent interaction to the extent that we developed a chemistry, very unusual chemistry that you develop with an African head of state. He actually, when I asked him if sometimes I wanted some comment from the president of Tanzania, would it be possible for him to accept my request so that I could interview him via telephone link-up? I was surprised when he responded. He said, Ndugu Shaka, you are the kind of journalist that if you called, and I had been informed by some of my aides that you were on the line and that you wanted an interview, I would definitely make time for you. I was so flattered, but in fact, even more humbled, because I did a couple of telephone interviews with President Mkapa. But it was one day that I was extremely humbled when I had just started the international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa, which debuted on August 2nd, 2000. He was essentially at the beginning of his second term. And he had come to attend the annual UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly, in September. He agreed to appear on Straight Talk Africa via satellite link-up from Washington while he would be in New York, in our studios in New York. And I remember when he came on the radar, we exchanged some pleasantries. I recall asking him, would he mind if, for example, I would refer to him the way he would be referred to back home as Ndugu Rais, which in Kiswahili means brother or comrade president. And he said, I wouldn't mind really, Shaka. I sometimes find some time to watch your interesting program. I like your program. And if you called me Ndugu Rais, it would be an honor. And we went on and talked for an hour. I have to say, it was one of the most interesting, most rewarding exchange I ever had with a man in that position from anywhere.
Why am I not surprised? You guys come from the same pedigree.
What do you mean the same pedigree? I never went to Makerere like you did.
So you guys have the same communication skills. You are the best at what you do. He was a great communicator. You are a great communicator. He rose through the ranks as as a journalist, as I think he first came onto stage as somebody who was this young man who knew what he was looking for, who talked and people listened. And in that respect, you do the same thing.
Thank you. He majored, of course, as I told you, in English. And when he returned home, his former teacher, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, was the president. And he offered him a position that he couldn't resist. He actually became his press secretary. And after that, he became the managing director of Daily News,
The government-owned newspaper.
a government-owned newspaper following the nationalization of what was then Tanganyika Standard, which was owned by Ronho, London Rhodesia, a company based at that time in Salisbury, which was the capital of what was known as Rhodesia. Tanganyika Standard was the sister newspaper in Kenya, which was known as Kenya Standard, and in Uganda, the almighty Uganda Argus, that helped me cut my first interest, really, in journalism, as we came to know it.
Yeah.
Tiny Rowland was the man at the helm of Ronho, London, Rhodesia. And then after that, he served as Tanzania's ambassador to the United States. He actually lived here in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He also served his country as the High Commissioner to Canada.
Correct.
He lived in Ottawa.
Mm.
He served as foreign minister, as Minister of Information, as Minister of Science, I believe, and Technology.
Correct.
He was perhaps one of the most experienced, one of the most seasoned public official to ever hold the number one office, number one position in the United Republic of Tanzania.
Mm. Shaka.
But it wasn't all very easy the way he climbed to the top.
Right.
Because I recall that in 1995, he actually became president at the expense of someone else that had been democratically chosen by the executive committee of the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi. And that was Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, who was serving at that time as his country's foreign minister. But I am told that Mwalimu Nyerere, who at the time was not president, but was the chairman of the Chama cha Mapinduzi, the ruling party, the revolutionary party, at the time before legally allowing the multi-party system of politics, the state in Tanzania was subordinate to the ruling party. And it was in that capacity that Nyerere vetoed the decision by the executive committee of the ruling party for young Kikwete to be the party's
flag bearer,
the party's candidate for the presidency. I am told, although I never verified this, but it is common knowledge to many observers of the political scene in Tanzania, that Mwalimu Nyerere at the time said that the contest really for the presidency was not about a beauty contest, insinuating that, yes, the young Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete was a very handsome man, very likable person, and somebody who obviously could perhaps do the job. But in his view, he felt that he still needed experience, and that to be a president of the Republic of Tanzania, you really needed experience. And he's argued that the man with the experience was Benjamin Mkapa. That is how Benjamin Mkapa got his first shot at being the third president of the United Republic of Tanzania.
What makes Mkapa tick?
The experience, the knowledge, the principles that he stood for. He was a person who was regarded as loyal in as far as President Nyerere was concerned. He was a senior official in the ruling party. He was a man who could be counted on. He was arguably one of the few highly educated people in Tanzania particularly, and in East Africa in general at the time.
Going back to when he was elected in 1995, he ran on a popular platform, a campaign platform of fighting corruption. And of course, he had the very strong support of the late former president Julius Nyerere, like you correctly said. But there are a lot of critics who said that maybe it was just a rhetoric when it came to doing exactly what he campaigned on. He fell short.
You know, it is interesting that you raise that point, because it is one of the key important questions that I put to him during our Straight Talk Africa interview. I told him that I had reliably learned that he was a very anti-corruption type of person. That in fact some people believed that when he came to power, he came with a broom in their words, to sweep corruption out of the Tanzanian system. And yet, he doesn't seem to have accomplished that. What happened? He, like other politicians, before they got into office, they sometimes criticize those that they are trying to succeed. And as some would suggest and say, it is one thing sometimes to talk the talk, but when it comes to walking that talk, so that people can actually walk the walk, you find that sometimes these politicians are missing in action. And as a matter of fact, he basically went on the defensive and said, Shaka, yes, you could probably have a broom to sweep corruption. But what you need at the end of the day, before you in fact act, you need evidence. You need facts. And I said, yes, you are right. But why couldn't you get the evidence? You are in charge of the country. You have the infrastructure. You have the institutions that can in fact carry out investigations, can collect that data, can collect that evidence that you are talking about. Why is it that you could not get the evidence? Because let's face it, there are times when even a person who happens to be blind can actually see the evidence that you are actually saying was missing. Because let's face it, you work with people. You can look at people's bank accounts. You know how much people earn every month. You can go to them and find out, or at least to require them to account for how they have been accumulating wealth. How did they buy that house, for example? A house that is a multi-million-dollar house. How did they buy a very, very expensive automobile? How were they able to send their children to study in South Africa or in Europe or North America without scholarships? It seems to me, frankly, that if you, I told him, were serious enough to get the evidence, you could have gotten the evidence. But he insisted, Paul, that he never got the evidence, that if he had in fact gotten the evidence, he could have acted on that. But you know, I told you at one time what a certain Mario Cuomo, a former governor of the state of New York, who happens to be the father of the current governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, said about politicians. He said that when politicians are running for office, they actually campaign in poetry. They promise heaven on earth, but that when they are elected to office and they get to the business of governing, that one, according to Mario Cuomo, they do it in prose.
Let's talk about his role as a regional statesman. Once he left active politics, he did not sit back and enjoy his champagne or wine. He was actively involved in trying to solve the conflicts in the region. Maybe speak to that.
First of all, Benjamin Mkapa was a gentleman. He was a man who liked to interact. He was a man who liked to enjoy himself. He actually loved life. Benjamin Mkapa also loved peace. And he worked very closely with his colleagues and counterparts, both in East Africa and across the continent. Yes, he basically was part of an effort at bringing peace and restoring stability, for example, in the Republic of Burundi. But he was a man that, first of all, presided over a country that had real stability. And he essentially continued in that fashion. He's the kind of person under whose tenure the media, for example, was not afraid to do its job. Just like I think currently there is a very bad relationship between the government of Tanzania and the media. Under Benjamin Mkapa, the media was free. Tanzania was a good place to go do business in. That's what I can say.
Let's cross over to Malawi. Of course, we are still watching the new president settle in. Several things have been happening. He has a cabinet. Things are moving forward. Your thoughts on the presidency of Dr. Lazarus Chakwera?
As I often say, I am not a political prophet. And therefore, I often, or for that matter, always like giving people the benefit of the doubt before I begin doing some sort of analysis and tearing them apart or building them. I would like to do the same thing for Lazarus Chakwera.
Dr. Lazarus Chakwera.
I'd like to do the same thing for Dr. Lazarus Chakwera, the new president of the Republic of Malawi. I think that there is plenty of time I think that we should give him the benefit of the doubt. We should let him do his thing. And perhaps, at least after 100 days in office, or after about a year in office, we revisit him again and make some kind of evaluation as to how he is managing his presidency.
Let's talk about how he came into becoming the president. Obviously, they had an election, a disputed election. They went through the court system, and the courts nullified the elections. We had a rerun. That's how he becomes president, overwhelmingly elected by the Malawian people. Speak about the process. What does it take for courageous people out there, people in opposition, people who have been waiting for their turn to one day to test power? What lessons can they learn from Malawi?
I think that first and foremost, if I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Chakwera, that would probably be one of my questions to put to him. First of all, I would like to say that what we saw happening in Malawi is what is needed, really, to be happening across the African continent. Africa does not need strong men or strong women. Africa needs strong institutions. Africa needs social, economic, political justice for all, and can only attain that if it embraces a system of democracy. By democracy, I mean accountability, accounting to the people that elect you to office. Africa needs elections that are organized and being conducted for the primary stakeholders of those countries, and not necessarily for the development partners, for the countries that give aid.
Speaking about elections, you had two bodies, or one body but run by two different people, that organized the same election and came up with a totally different result. How is that done, and how is that even remotely possible in the context of what we see on a daily, day-to-day basis in some of these African countries?
It is not a sort of one-size-fits-all, really, when you look at the continent. You have to look at how, for example, each country gets its electoral commission. There are countries where the constitution will allow or give powers to the incumbent president to actually select and appoint commissioners on the electoral commission. If the incumbent president has the sole power of constituting the electoral commission, clearly then you can begin to smell a sense of how the chairman or chairperson of that electoral commission and other commissioners probably owe more allegiance, loyalty to the appointing authority than the government, as it were.
Not we end it there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaka.